Okay, our next presenter is Annie Platoff, and is, as you know, NAVA's digital librarian. One of the many services she has rendered to the association over many years. She has served on the board as second and first vice president, and is the author of Russian Regional Flags, a 2009 volume of Raven, still in print and in demand. She has twice earned the Driver Award and received an honorable mention. She and Steve Knowlton were jointly honored with the Whitney Smith Award. She's a laureate of FIAV and has also received the International Federation's Vexillological Award. Her doctoral dissertation, Symbols in Service to the State, the Role of Flags and Other Symbols in the Civil Religion of the Soviet Union, was published by the Flag Heritage Foundation in 2012. Annie, over to you.
Thank you. Okay. So, as I'm speaking, there's going to be, I got a volunteer to start on each side. There's going to be a handout with a URL. So everybody take a piece of paper with the URL on it. And there's going to be 6 flags circulating. The people in the back row here, what we'll have to do, because I didn't know there were 4 rows on this side, and I only have 6 flags. And the flags are going to start on either end. You don't get to keep them. You have to keep passing them. So when they get to the middle, just pass them back to the AV table, and they can pass them over to the 4th row. The idea of these flags is so you can actually touch one of these artifacts I'm talking about and look at it in detail and sniff it or whatever. So enjoy. Okay. So in my 2011 article, just a minute, I didn't catch myself. I'm winging it with the AV here, so just pardon me. In my 2010 article, Soviet Children's Flags, I examined a collection of flags designed for children, including a sample of little holiday flags. For that study, I looked at the symbols used and discussed how they related to specific Soviet holidays. 15 years later, my collection of holiday flags has expanded to 71 examples, with 59 unique designs represented. The previous study established that holiday flags were objects that many Soviet children encountered during their childhoods. As artifacts of Soviet childhood, they are worthy of more study. But what else can be learned from them? What methods can be used to analyze this group of flags? Other than my research, very, very little has been written about these things. I've found 2 terms in Russian for the flags. Праздничный флажок, and that one means holiday little flag, and детский флажок, which means children's little flag. So the word flажок is just a diminutive form of flag, which means little flag. Okay. For my last study, I posted to a Russian flag listserv called Rusovex, and I asked them about these flags. One Russian vexillologist commented it was pretty typical to see a Soviet child holding a flaglet of this kind in hand. Another one asserted that they were not seen as serious vexillological objects and said they looked like toys and they were just used like toys. Okay. Now, there are 2 other things that could be called holiday flags. I don't have an example of the second one, but one of the others are these little ribbons. And these are designed for adults to pin to their lapel when they march in a demonstration. So we're not talking about these. Okay. And the other one is like a garland of flags that would have been used to decorate a New Year's tree. So sometimes those are called holiday flags. But for this talk, we're specifically talking about these little handheld toy flags that are moving around through the audience. Okay. Make sure we're on the same page. There we go. Additionally, from Rusovex, I learned that the flags were inexpensive and sold in toy stores. In fact, I bought my first such flag in a school supply store in Kyiv in 1983 for 20 kopecks. The Russian vexillologist also told me that flags were given out free to children at demonstrations. A new survey that I posted this year confirmed these memories. One respondent remembered them from both May Day and the anniversary of the Great October Revolution. This time around, I wanted to try to find a new method to look at the flags. So remembering some archaeology courses I took when I was in grad school, I pulled out my old field methods textbook and started looking through it for methods to analyze artifacts. I chose what they call the typological method, And this approach is how archaeologists will often study a big group of items that have been recovered from a site. With typological analyses, you sort the objects down into groups based on shared attributes. In this case, I chose shape, dimensions, proportions, color scheme, borders, and hoist markings. So I'm completely ignoring the symbols and the writing on the flag. I also wanted to see what I could learn by sorting them all down. And so I just piled them all on the couch and started. And this is how they shaped out as I did it typologically. Shows you all the different groupings. I thought it really did a good job of grouping similar flags together. And I also had some flags that didn't have any little buddies to be in their group, and that's okay. That'll happen in any study like this. The usefulness of this technique becomes clear, though, when you start looking at the type groupings. Here are all the flags from type A, and they're all the same basic dimensions. They have the same markings on the hoist, which is very important. Notably, design-wise, they have the same unique layout with the printed fringe found on the fly. And they all have the same price and logo printed on the hoist. So I was very excited to see this was all kind of shaking down. The type B flags also matched up quite well. Again, they're all the same basic size and style of manufacture, and there were no markings on the type B flags on the hoist. One advantage of analyzing flag types instead of the full set of flags is that it's easier to see trends without your statistics being skewed if you have more than one example of the same flag type. So I know that sounds very strange, but for example, type A, where I had 7 flags, if I had counted each individual flag in these statistics, it would have skewed the end results. Also, looking at the flags by color and by type, overwhelmingly, so this is just the color types, not individual flags, you can see that red flags were the most prominent, with yellow printing being the most typical. Likewise, looking at the proportions and shapes by type shows us that the most of the types were proportioned 1:2, like the Soviet national flag. This shouldn't be too surprising. Swallowtail designs were the most common. Going back to the full set of flags, I wanted to look at the trends for the types of symbols used. In this case, I needed to find a graphical display that shows trends without implying that I have a complete set of flags. We have no way of knowing how many different designs were available during the course of Soviet history. So a pie chart wouldn't quite cut it. Okay. I decided to use word clouds because I thought they were the perfect tool because they use size to show frequency of use without implying it's a percentage of a whole. So basically, the words that are larger, there are more types, more flags that are using that particular symbol. This also worked well for looking at the text on the flags. In this case, I produced 2 different word clouds, one with the English translations and one with the original languages. I thought this was necessary because 3 of the flags actually had the text in Latvian rather than in Russian. Now, I realize some of you will notice that the words aren't lined up the same in each chart. I couldn't get my free word chart generator to put the words in the same spot. But anyway, just bear with me. You can see, though, that the corresponding words are typically the same size. Okay, and finally, I produced a word cloud for the overall themes of the flags. Having studied Soviet symbols and propaganda for several decades now, I was actually not surprised by which themes were the most prominent. All right, next, we're not done yet. It gets even cooler. All right. When you look past the designs and you focus on the other information that's available for the flags, there's actually a lot more that could be learned. And this is where I got really geeked out on this. This is really fun. This information is found in 2 places. It's marked on the hoists of the flags on some of them, and also printed on factory labels. And while one specimen had the label physically sewn to it, most labels, as best as I've determine were affixed to the packaging. So they haven't really survived unless somebody had a full package and has placed it up on eBay. So it's harder to find those individual labels that were on packages of groups of flags. The most common piece of information that you'll find on these flags is the price. Usually it's indicated by the Russian letter Tse, which looks kind of like a U with a little tail. And it's short for the word Tsena, meaning price. It's then followed by the numbers and by the abbreviation K for kopecks, which was the subdivision of the ruble. Prices on the steady flags ranged from 10 to 50 kopecks, so they're relatively cheap, with most in the 16 to 20 kopeck range. Now, this is one of these little cultural things that you wouldn't always think about, but the fact that the prices are printed on the flag is a reminder that the Soviet Union had a controlled economy. So they would determine the price when they made the flag, and that was the price at every shop in the entire country. So that's kind of one of those little cultural notes that you wouldn't think about just by looking at the price on the flag. Okay, make sure I'm on the same slide. Good. I'd never really thought about all this other information I was finding on the flags before. I was so obsessed with the symbols that I wasn't going further. So if you look at these numbers that start with the Russian letters OST, or it looks like October to most of you. So that's OST. Those numbers reminded me of manufacturing standard numbers that I used to work with at the library at NASA's Johnson Space Center. Oh my goodness, I'm running out of time already. Okay, so what I did is I started doing research and I discovered OST is indeed the Russian abbreviation for industry standard. So that's kind of cool. I couldn't locate the full text of the standards, but I was able to find the titles in the online catalog of the National Library in St. Petersburg. Most of the flags that have OST numbers use the one for wooden toys. Only one flag in my entire collection has the standard for banners or flags. So I found that really significant. One more thing about the OST numbers. The last two digits in the number indicates the year of the standard. So we now have a dating tool to try to date ranges of flags. You could say any flag that has that 1973 number was made in 73 or later. So that's kind of cool. Another type of number you find is an article number. It's ERT in Russian, or it might look like the abbreviation for apartment to you, the rest of you. This is basically an inventory control number from the factory. As best as I can determine, these are just factory-specific numbers. So every factory had their own numbering system. If you look at the example at the top, they have both an article number and a price list number. So I thought that was interesting. And then on other flags, there are numbers not labeled as article numbers, but I think that's what they are. So I think those other stray numbers. All right, this is my favorite part. These are logos that I found printed on some of the flags and on some of the labels. So I started researching Soviet labels and discovered that yes, indeed, they're factory specific. And I found this very cool, very lengthy PDF that just had pictures and indicated factory names. And so I went through like 400 pages of Soviet flag logos. But what was cool was I was able to identify all but one of the factories for these flags. And they're from several different republics in the Soviet Union. So I thought that was very cool. Now, one thing that's important to know is logos were not required for factories until 1962. So this is another dating indicator. If you've got a logo, it's likely to date after 1962. However, the absence of the logo doesn't work as a date indicator because sometimes they just printed the logo on the labels. So it could be post 62, even if it doesn't have a logo. Focusing on the details helped me find some interesting pairings. At first glance, the flags in each group might look like the same design. However, when you start looking at them in detail, you'll start seeing that they might be redesigns. So in the first case, you'll notice the Soviet emblem and the lettering style is much clearer and much more defined. The second line, we do know that sets 1 and 2 are from the same manufacturers because they have the same logo. So that's kind of cool. Set 3, that one, there's just some details in the lines behind the doves. So that was different. And then actually, that was set 2. Sorry. Set 3 has this very cool design of, I don't know if it's a design flaw or choice, that tells me that I'm sure these are from the same manufacturer. If anybody's been to Red Square, you'll notice that the buildings are flipped. So because the buildings are behind the wall, so we're on Red Square. If you're on Red Square, Savior's Tower is going to be on your left and the Kremlin Senate is going to be on your right. So I find it very unlikely that 2 random factories would have chosen to flip these 2 buildings on their flag. And then finally, that last set 4, I think they look very similar, but I have no evidence for or against them being redesigned. So I have no other evidence other than the similarity. Here's another batch that I think might be from the same factory. The one on the right is the one that has the label that uses the specification for flags. Okay, so we can pretty much be sure that's from maybe a flag manufacturer instead of a toy factory. These are the only flags that have overprinted designs. So I think that's interesting because they're much more technical production needs. They both basically have a defaced Soviet flag. They both say Spraznikum, which is basically the Russian equivalent of Happy Holiday. And likewise, they have these really cool stabs. So the stabs have a molded finial at the top. When you get down to where the sleeve for the flag is, the actual staff is more narrow. And then there's this neat little flared area underneath that holds the flag in place on the staff. So I thought that was a detail. All of the other ones are basically just dowels or plastic rods. So I thought that was a very interesting detail also that likely indicates that these came from maybe a flag manufacturer. Here's another one. I'd never really noticed the borders or lack thereof. I hadn't paid attention to it. But only 3 of the flags in my collection are lacking borders. Okay, so think about this. Why are borders useful? These are toys, and they didn't hem them. So of course borders are useful because they prevent fraying. So, when you start looking at these little details, you start thinking, oh, yes, that makes perfect sense. They're toy flags. Here's some more interesting examples. At the top are the 3 and type E that have the text in Latvian. So this leads me to conclude they were probably manufactured in the Latvian SSR rather than in one of the other republics. Below are 2 that show the cruiser Aurora. So this is a ship that kind of fired the first shot of the revolution, very famous ship. It's moored in St. Petersburg. And when I got my first example, which is the one on the right, I just thought it was an error that they had printed it on the reverse. But then I got a second example and it's made exactly the same way. So I just found that kind of interesting. This is the only example where they've printed on the reverse of the flag. There's also this group. This group has a weird set of colors. I mean, it's the only ones that aren't white with red or red with either yellow or white. So I don't know if they just had some extra fabric made left over. Maybe it was like Jim's shop, just using up the extra fabric. But I found them very, very interesting. And what was really fascinating is when I found the logo, it was a factory that made cardboard boxes. So, okay, that's different. One of the trends now, Whitney Smith offered various definitions for the term vexillology. So let me read you 2 of them. The analysis of flags and their usage in different countries, or the scientific study of the history, symbolism, and use of flags. Okay, I think these are important to bring up every once in a while. With the definitions, he's not suggesting like hard science. He was a social scientist. So what he's telling us is he wants us to be methodical. He wants us to be systematic. He wants us to be scholarly. That's what he's talking about when he talks about scientific. So one of the new trends in academia is the sharing of research data. And this is becoming very popular. It used to be, I mean, it's been standard in the sciences for a long time, but it's really relatively new in social sciences. So what I did, and I'm hoping this is going to work when I click on it, is I have created an Omeka site that you can all go to. I just gave you all the URL. It worked. Didn't it come up? No, it didn't. Of course not. So I've created this site. Omeka is a tool that a lot of libraries and archives are using to share their data. And hang up here so you can help me get back. Okay, so this is the site. And basically you can go in and you can see the data on every flag and every photo and the hoist markings and the logos. So I'd love to have you all go in and check it out after the conference and spend some time looking around. What I'm hoping is that other people that are interested in Soviet childhood, in Soviet flags, in flags and children, any such thing, would be able to go in here and use the different site. Now, I've attempted to make this a multilingual Russian-English site. I can read some Russian. I am not fluent. So if there are people who are more fluent than me and you spot Russian errors, please send them to me and I will fix them as best I can. Yeah, I did the best I could with my limited language skills. All right, if you can get me back. Okay, sweet. 2 more slides. All right, so I've been fascinated by these things since I bought my first flag in Kyiv. While not all the designs are overly patriotic, the prevalence of red flags clearly ties them to the national flag and was meant to help children relate and feel a connection to the red flag of revolution and to their country's flag. The idea that their little red flag could contribute to something larger is expressed in this passage about May Day in a children's book. The last passage reads, if on May Day, you were to look at the Earth from space, it would appear a red sphere. The workers raised so many of our banners, and you should go outside with your little flag. Let the Earth be even more red. So let's summarize what we now know about these flags. They're inexpensive toys. They were sold in toy stores, given out free to children. The flags were usually red or had red text. They often had patriotic themes. They were sometimes used national symbols. While not considered to be real flags, they could be a toy substitute for the national flag. Thus, they could be considered an educational toy for political socialization. This project has demonstrated that revisiting previous research topics can be fruitful. Looking at flags as artifacts gave me a new perspective. For example, I realized that the borders served a very practical purpose. I also have shown I've also shown that there were designs that weren't red, which my Russian friends had said, oh no, they're all red. No, they aren't. And there are also flags in languages other than Russian. I've discovered that some of the designs were revised and improved over time. I found that OS 10 numbers, the standard numbers, could be used for dating, and that other numbers on the flags appear to be inventory numbers. For me, the most exciting part was the factory logos, that I could trace those to not just the factory names, but to the cities. In one case, I was able to Google, I found a photo of the factory. I thought, oh, this is so cool. But anyway, I was able to identify the factory name and location for 12 different groups of flags. And I'm not done yet because, of course, I'm going to collect more of these and I'm going to look at them again and again and again. So I'm just, you can just keep working with your collections, with your interests, and develop them over time and share your results. So I hope you found this interesting. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, thanks. So the most obvious question is why did these flags exist and why were they produced? If you were to look at sort of typical U.S. kids on some national holiday, they'd probably be waving little U.S. flags. So it's interesting why these variations became so prevalent. So last year at the NAVA conference, Bart Cosman had this absolutely wonderful paper, which won the
Yeah.
Driver Award, about Simchat Torah flags, which are only flown by children and only flown one day a year. And he had a theory which convinces me, but which is a wonderful theory about why. You know, so I have that question for you. The question is why?
Okay. Here's a couple ideas I've thought about. First of all, what happens to that little US flag after the kid is given it at a parade? Does it end up on the ground? Does it end up in the trash at home? Does it end up under their bed getting eaten by things? Who knows? So one possibility is that having a child play with the actual Soviet flag would have been considered inappropriate, but a flag substitute is a perfectly fine way to deal with it. Even if it's a defaced sort of Soviet flag, they're never the exact specifications. So that, I think, is my leading thought about this. The other thing is this is what's interesting about the red banner of revolution. If you think about the whole idea of socialism and the power of the people grasping power, so the red banner of revolution belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the government. So these red flags that aren't necessarily a Soviet flag can belong to the people. So I think that's part of it. And if you look in my thesis, when you get a chance, I talk a lot about what the children were told about the red banner, how it was explained to them, how their little pioneer tie was described as a piece of the banner of revolution that was theirs to protect and to value. So I think that kind of ties in with this. It's also interesting to me that the Russian vexillologists, it's like, these are toys. Don't even bother looking at them. They really thought it was weird that I was interested in these because they don't think of them as significant. I think it needed the outsider to look at them. And I think that's true a lot of times with different cultural phenomena. But, I had my retirement recently and they put cupcake flags on the cupcakes. And there was part of me that was like, ooh, flags. And then the other part of me was like, oh my, what's going to happen to all those flags? They're going to get thrown away, So again, with toy flags, I often think about that. And it's not uncommon to see somebody has stuck US flags in the ground, along the curb or something for a holiday. And over time, they start leaning over. And by the end, they're all shredded and muddy and gross. So again, substitute flags, I think, as well. Okay.
Okay, just check. Oh yeah, this works. So my question was, were these in practice reused for long periods of time, or would they just be thrown away after a while, like you mentioned? Were these things that people played with or kept as collector's items?
So let me get back to the postcards. Wait a minute. Because I didn't really talk about them. I talked about them more in the thesis. But somewhere further back, I have some pictures of up there we go. I lost them again. I hate these little things. Come on. Yeah, help me get back to the one that has the little kids marching. Okay, so I think it's near the front. All right. So anyway, I think both. I think some of them were valued. So I've actually had correspondence with some Russian vexillologists that say, I still have one of those. So obviously to them, it was significant and something they hung on from with their childhood. I found a blog posting in Russian where people were talking about, we had these in the kindergarten. Yes, we had these, and people would chime in. Yes, I still have one. So there are people that did keep them. But I think other people just thought they're toys, and when I'm done with it, I just get rid of it. Maybe it's shredded, who knows? So a little bit of all that. But I buy most of mine off of eBay. And usually I'm buying from sellers in countries where Soviet symbols aren't particularly favored. but they understand the capitalist value of selling old Soviet stuff. So I get a lot of mine from Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Ukraine, to be perfectly honest, because those are the sellers that can do PayPal most easily and do eBay. So that's where most of my examples come from. Okay. Oh, sorry. That's all right. You can ask me that.
One of the slogans on one of the flags, you had translated, "May there always be sunshine," which is the first line of a song.
Yes.
And Pete Seeger recorded that song. And I'm wondering, the lyrics are very sweet. And I'm wondering is that slogan, "May there always be sunshine," is that something that comes up that they use a lot, or just on that one flag?
Oh, no, very, very common. I've got, I think, 2 or 3 examples that say, "May there always be sunshine." There's one that says, "May there always be peace." And then there's quite a few that have sun motifs. So the sun is interesting because it is in the Soviet state emblem. It's kind of one of those overlooked pieces that people totally ignore when they're looking at the giant hammer and sickle. Right below it, illuminating it, is the sun. So the sun is on the Soviet state arms. The other thing is, this was a young pioneer song, and it was a really common song for kids throughout the Soviet Union to sing at their pioneer groups. I'm not sure if the Octobrists sang. I haven't quite, figured out where the dividing. I know the age limits for Octobrists, which are like Cub Scout Brownie age, and the pioneers. But as far as which songs and what activities they necessarily did, I don't know if the younger kids would have sung this song. But yes, that's a very common one. It also all ties in with the peace motif. So when you go in, you'll discover peace is a very strong motif that goes across a lot of these flags, because officially, the Soviet Union was portraying itself as peacefully spreading the idea of socialism. And socialism was going to naturally occur as societies developed and evolved. This was going to be the natural state. So you have to remember that in the US, we were always kind of told, no, they're going to take over the world. But that wasn't the official line. The world was just going to come and join in the brotherhood. So this peace motif is very, very strong. A lot of former Soviet children remember going out and doing peace marches. A lot of those flags with the doves and the phrase "Miru Mir," which means "to the world peace." People remember that. So the peace motif and the sunshine, I think, kind of go together as well. Okay, thank you very much.